welcome everybody here in the auditorium and welcome everybody online. Thanks for coming to our kickoff event for what we will construe to be an ongoing series of community engaged research discussions. My name is Carol Burns and I'm Deputy Lab Director for Research. And I'm glad to be here to moderate the event because then I don't have to answer all the tough questions. I just get to ask them. A note to everybody that we're going to be recording this event. So if you have questions to ask, there will be runners with microphones in the room, or else we will have questions moderated on the chat. So feel free to just put the questions there. I first off want to thank everybody who made this possible. This kind of conversation started about a year ago with a small but hearty group of people saying, what do we think? What do we want to do? We had energy technologies involved and government and community relations and the IDEA office and learning and culture has been involved. And that sort of evolved into, you know what, if we want to know what the lab wants to do in community engaged research, and in fact, what we're already doing, we need to ask and get people engaged. And hence this broader dialogue was born. So we're really proud that we're going to have a lab-wide speaker series to showcase examples of our community engaged research practices and projects around the lab and highlight examples and drive really where we want to go as a community through bidirectional learning and engagement. I think it's part and parcel of our team science stewardship value that we build intentional collaborations with everything that we would constitute to be broader communities that we work with. And certainly we're very committed to building respectful and trusted relationships and partnerships with communities to ensure both that our science improves the lives of people in an equitable and just manner, and also to ensure that we are giving our science the best opportunity to really have impact. So with that, we've invited a few of our senior leaders to join us here today, and we're going to share more about their perspectives on community engaged research and why it's important. So what I'm going to do at this point is invite each one of you to introduce yourself and say why you think this is important to be here today. So Marianne.
Thanks. My name is Marianne Piette, and I'm the Associate Lab Director for Energy Technologies here at LBL. And I'm really excited, Carol, for being here today to share with the lab community about this concept of community engaged research. So when we do our research, many of us are very motivated by decarbonization and addressing things like climate change, but also thinking about affordable, reliable, equitable, clean energy. But when we do these things, we need to think about the communities that we're impacting and the technologies that we study and deploy. So we develop things, and then we try to deploy them in a community context. So the community engaged research concept is extremely important if we think about how are we impacting the air, the landscape, the cost of energy. So I'm excited to be here and just thinking about how we can make a difference and how we can make sure we bring people along with us for equity and justice.
That's excellent. Thanks. Bill.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, lady, for setting this series up, and Jen as well. I think it's very timely. I'm Bill Collins, the Associate Laboratory Director for Earth and Environmental Sciences here at Berkeley Laboratory. In addition to my normal duties as a director, I do research on climate change. And this topic is particularly pertinent now that we're thinking about really changing out a lot of our infrastructure due to the need to electrify our economy, to electrify the vehicle fleet. There's going to be an enormous amount of change that we are expecting and hoping will come. And that change has to be brought in a way that people recognize that it's good for them in their daily lives. And so community relations around this really titanic amount of infrastructure change that's going to need to happen in order for us to beat the climate crisis. This conversation couldn't be more timely because building, Carol, you mentioned trust that's earned, respect that's given, but those are two really critical elements for how we're going to pull this off. And so I think this is a great time to hold this conversation because, 20 years from now, the Bay Area, California, the nation is not going to look anything like what it looks now. But that's going to involve making sure that everybody wants to come along for the ride. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you. I have to make an admission. I forgot to put on my dress shoes. I'm wearing my sneakers,
Ready to hit the ground running.
but I'm very comfortable. I'll be here all week. So my name is Tom Kirchstetter. I'm the division director for one of the 3 divisions in the energy technologies area. It's the Energy Analysis and Environmental Impacts Division. Many of the researchers in my division have been engaged in community-oriented, community-based research for a long time. One of the reasons I think it's important is that it furthers the impact, the beneficial impact of Berkeley Lab. You know, our mission is to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. And by partnering with communities, we can help to ensure that we're also addressing problems that have real societal needs that are sort of driven in partnership with communities. I also think that it really promotes an added sense of purpose and job satisfaction for the people at the lab. And we all know that. We have very talented researchers and scientists at the lab who could perhaps go on to make more money elsewhere. And the mission is a big part of what drives me to continue to work here and drives others to continue to work here. And I think community-based and community-engaged research just furthers that mission.
Terrific. Thanks. So we have a series of questions for discussion. I'm going to kind of rotate around asking first questions, but let me start with Marianne and ask, how would you define community engaged research, including within the Justice 40 landscape? And what do you think it means for research?
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge the fact that while we've been doing it, we're actually trying to formalize more the concept of community engaged research. So the number one thing to think about is engaging with the community. And that means understanding the diverse voices and stakeholders in the community. That could be public officials, mayors, school districts. It could be private sector folks. It could be disadvantaged communities. So when we think about community engagement, we need to communicate with them about these new projects that we're bringing, wind and solar projects, microgrid projects, and understand how they experience the ideas that we're bringing to them. So we have to listen. So community engaged research means that we are conducting purposeful engagement with the community and having a dialogue with them about these new technologies that we're trying to deploy, and that we are understanding their concerns and listening. And one of the most important things is this concept of listening, because often we come and we say, we're going to do this, this is going to be great. But they may say, wait a minute, I'm concerned about, will my house be influenced by these wind turbines over here, things like that. So there's a lot of challenges when they hear about these changes. People are concerned about change. So community engagement is the process to engage with the community and understand their perspective on these new projects.
Excellent. So Bill, same question. What does this whole concept mean for research?
It means including the community as an active partner in the project. So in essence, they co-own the project. The project is being co-developed with them. There are clear objectives in the project, just as there would be for scientific objectives. There are objectives around community outcomes. We typically think about what success looks like scientifically, but we also need to be thinking about what success looks like for the people in the community in terms of, for example, fresh opportunities for employment, improvements in their environment, improvements in the outcomes for their family members, their schools, and broader community. I was thinking about this, Carol, on the way over, and it occurred to me that it's really sort of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So I was thinking about how would I feel if somebody came into the Berkeley Hills where I live and asked to build a carbon sequestration plant, up the street. What would I want from them? And I think looking at through that lens where we stop, there's this tendency, I think, to think of, the communities being on the receiving end. But if we just think about reversing the tables so that we're now on the receiving end of something they want to do to us, what would we want out of that engagement? And I think that helps frame, the types of things we would expect: transparency, accountability, some sense of co-ownership. I think those are all key properties of a successful community, community engaged research project.
Mhm. So Tom, how do you define community engaged research and what does it mean for your organization and the researchers?
Yeah, I concur with everything that Marianne and Bill just said. I guess I would just maybe echo or emphasize some of those key points. One is that it's an active partnership between researchers and community members. The engagement ideally takes place before a scope of work is conceived of. The communities are engaged in actually conducting the research to the extent possible, and that the benefits are mutual that there's shared benefit. So the scientific rigor, but there's also societal impact. And the best way to achieve that is to make sure that the community members are engaged in scoping out the work in the first place. I like your comment about the long-term impact. I think aiming for sustainability when possible is really the best bet. If it's a transactional experience for the community members, and I do
Excellent.
work with the community, and I write a scientific publication, and I consider that a success, the community is not going to consider that a success.
That's excellent.
The benefit has to really be felt by the community-based organization and the community members. And again, coming back to the sustainability, if it involves some ability to build capacity in the community such that the benefit outlasts the project, that's even better. I would say that's an important aspect of community engaged research when possible. And before we were up on stage, we were just chatting down here, and Marianne mentioned that we're all trained as scientists, not necessarily trained to do community engaged research. So we're sort of, in a sense, writing a script, building frameworks, learning from best practices from others, but also basically learning by doing. And sometimes learning by doing means making mistakes and learning. So I've made some mistakes myself over my research career. We've done research that was relevant to a community without engaging the community, and we heard from the community about it. And that's a really good lesson learned. So we're learning by doing, and I hope that the series that follows this, the seminar series, is sort of helping to sort of amplify the learnings and the best practices.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a really great perspective. So I'm going to pivot to another question. I think I'll start with Bill this time. So we just talked a lot about the benefits to communities and ensuring that we understand and listen from the community and defining benefits to them. But let's turn the tables for a minute. Okay, we're a national lab. Why is it important for us to engage with communities, and what are the benefits to us in our research?
Well, I think, I was going to start with what not to do. And what not to do, many communities of color and historically disadvantaged communities have been on the receiving end of a tremendous amount of environmental damage, right? So they have long memories, and they know precisely what that looks like, right? And so we're coming into a situation where the communities have had things done to them. And at the same time, as we were just discussing, in order to address the climate problem, a lot of the solutions that we're thinking about have to be brought online in a way that's going to, people will notice the change, right? So imagine California without any gas stations in it. That's going to happen in our lifetime. There will be no gas stations in California. Equally radical changes of that kind, but building community acceptance where suddenly, we take a lot of technologies that until now have been pilot plants, you could ignore them. They're off in some remote desert someplace, and suddenly they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. Carbon dioxide removal plants, geologic sequestration, a lot of other facilities are coming online. They need to be there. If that's going to succeed, if people are willing to have it be that omnipresent in their lives, they have to recognize that it's not only for the greater good, it's for their own good. And so if we have aspirations to bring science to society, that act of the transfer, the handoff, is now going to involve orders of magnitude increase in the sort of omnipresence of these technological solutions in a very short order. And I think that sort of bespeaks, Carol, to a different kind of community engagement. It's not nice to have, it's essentially must have in the context where we're now looking at truly generational, transformational technological change that has to happen right now. And we want to be at the forefront of that, but in order to make that work, we have to make people, we have to work with communities so that everyone recognizes that this is for a common good and also a very practical good and a good in the here and now. It can't be, I'm sorry, I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll stop.
That's okay.
We are, at the moment, we're all in this room, we're all exhaling carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide in this room is probably elevated above background, right? But you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't see it. So if I remove all the carbon dioxide that we just exhaled in this room, you'd be none the wiser. It's a climate benefit, but what did you get out of it? That's not the kind of benefit we need to be going after. We need to be going after benefits where people see something very tangible, where their lives are improved in the here and now. And somehow pulling off that hat trick is a key to our being successful as a national laboratory.
Thank you very much. So Tom, same question. Now you talked about being a resource in the area. When you didn't engage the community, you heard about it. But presumably there are benefits that accrue to research as well from community engagement. So reflect on that a little bit. Why is it important for us to engage with communities and how do researchers benefit?
Yeah, happy to. So I think I would start by saying that community engaged research is very much consistent with promoting the stewardship values that we're trying to foster and grow here at Berkeley Lab. Partnering with the local community allows us to learn from the community members, their lived experiences, their local experiences. And that can benefit us because it often involves increasing the diversity of the teams that we're working with, which could lead to perhaps more innovative and more impactful solutions. And then in exchange, it brings access of scientific expertise and resources to communities. I think those are sort of very much consistent with central elements of our stewardship values. And quite honestly, I believe that helped builds the culture at the national lab, at this lab. And so that's one of the primary reasons I think that it's important for a lab like Berkeley Lab and other national labs to be participating in community engaged research beyond the job satisfaction that comes with it. As we know, many people are motivated to actually do work that sort of benefits the real world and then communities sort of in the very near term. And as I mentioned earlier, when we have, our mission is to solve some of the world's greatest problems. And if we do that by partnering with local communities, then we can also ensure that some of those problems are actually help addressing local societal needs.
So Marianne, you see a lot across your area. What do you see as the benefits and why it's important for all labs to be involved to some degree in engagement with communities?
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned earlier, which we didn't touch on formally, is the Justice 40 concept. So DOE is hoping that 40% of the funds that they invest benefit disadvantaged and low-income communities. So we actually are still learning how to provide benefits to them. So when we do community engaged research, we are trying to make sure we understand the impact that the technologies we're studying, whether they're buildings or EVs or direct air capture, who's being impacted by these things. And that's not a simple question. When we think about the impacts, there are health impacts, there are economic impacts, there are workforce impacts, there are educational issues associated with these technologies. So as we look across our broad set of technologies, we have to better understand the regions, the geographic regions, the economic regions, and we need to understand that there's not a single voice in a community. There's many voices, and we want them to hear each other because there may be people that are for this new wind farm and another group that's not for the wind farm. And how do we bring them both to the table and have a discussion So our researchers know if they want to deploy these things at scale, what are the barriers to large scale deployment? And what are the role of communities in that? And we actually formally, just today, there was a study out of Energy Markets and Policy Group on survey of utility scale wind and solar developers. And it's actually about the role of community engagement in that. So it's an active area. Some of our staff are very involved in trying to understand that.
You raise a really interesting point and something I think we've struggled with in our dialogue, which is what do we mean by community? What is our definition of community? Even in the initial discussions we had with the National Lab, Community Engaged Research, there was some discussion of, well, can we have common best practices? Well, but we're all in different geographic regions. We all have different stakeholders. We all may work in different technical areas. So does anybody want to offer a sense of how broadly do we want to find community in this endeavor? Sorry, I'm calling an audible and throwing you a question that you didn't see ahead of time, but go for it.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. I don't mind the audible. I think we should just be flexible about what we define as the community. I mean, for me, it's been, for example, the community of West Oakland, or communities in Modesto or East Oakland. These jurisdictions have separate governance and local community-based organizations that they engage with. And if that's not the definition for every community engaged research project, that's okay. I think we need not define the community as much as we want to define sort of the best practices. And maybe by simple measure, if you're working with a community-based organization, let them define the community.
That's really interesting.
There's a bit of a functional answer to your question, Carol, which I think Tom, you mentioned earlier, the need for long-term engagement. And I think one way of ensuring that is that you and the community members both live in the same area, because then that way, they know that you're invested in the long-term outcomes as well. You can see each other face to face, which I think is, especially early on, is going to be very critical for building trust. And the other aspect of that is the need to not only start strong, but then have them feel like you're not helicoptering in, so that this is you're in there for the long haul. You're in there for not years, but for decades. I think all these different things speak to a little bit of a localization, I think, for just at least for maximum optimal outcomes. Because then people think, okay, you're in the community, you're invested in it, I can come see you. We're in this for the long haul. You're not going to head out to some think tank. And that, I think, all helps build a sense of trust and co-investment, which is key.
Yeah, so I'd like to add to what Bill said that there are over 100 technical assistance programs at DOE these days in deployment and research. And there is a multi-lab effort around community engagement, technical assistance best practices, and coordination. And it is focused on what Bill just said of geographically contiguous communities. When I was talking with these folks about what they meant by community, you could think of a community of practice, a community of facility managers, or a community of school districts. But that's not what the term a lot of the DOE community engaged research is around. It is around direct communities that are in geographic locations, not communities of practice. So there are different words. We also have this concept of connected communities, and those may actually be groups of buildings in a region, but they may not be contiguous. So there are different uses of the word, but mostly it's kind of for community-based organizations in a geographic region.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's pivot now and put a little more specifics to this. So what are some examples from your area or division that involve community engaged research? And I'm going to go to the end first and invite Tom to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. So again, the division that I lead is named Energy Analysis and Environmental Impacts. And so the community engaged research projects that our researchers do often address energy, environmental, or climate related issues facing communities. So I've come with examples, one of each. So in one case, we are partnering with UC Berkeley to conduct air pollution monitoring in communities. This is almost all in California. And the communities are those that are typically bearing the brunt of the worst air pollution in the state. So just put a little bit of flavor to that. We were able to develop a new air pollution monitor that measures black carbon or soot, think from diesel engines. And then we partnered with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, which is the local environmental justice group in West Oakland, led by Ms. Margaret Gordon and Brian Beveridge. And with them, we recruited 100 sites, residences and building and businesses, local businesses, and deployed a network of 100 black carbon monitors in West Oakland and monitored for 100 days. We actually called that the 100 by 100 study. We even created a logo for it. It's one of the only research projects my team members created a logo for. So we were able to monitor air pollution in that community. We showed how patterns in air pollution were very much related to truck activity and also a couple of local industrial activities. And we provided that data to the community and to the Air Quality Management District so that they could be better informed and better empowered to sort of advocate for the mitigation of air pollution within that community. And that research project, I'm very proud to say, took place before the state's official program that followed afterwards, which was called Community Air Protection Plan. And we've participated with other communities in Modesto, and now with East Oakland and San Francisco, with other local community-based organizations to continue to do the same. And some of those projects involve actually training the residents themselves to participate and do the monitoring themselves. So sort of adding value, adding experiential value and building trust. Marianne mentioned technical assistance that we provide. So we do a lot of technical assistance to states, both sort of like institutional level, but also community-based organization level. You mentioned the work that we're doing to understand sort of the influence of sort of renewable energy projects on home values, like solar energy projects on home values in the community. DOE has a program called the National Community Solar Partnerships Program. And as an example, a specific example of research there. So community members might want to have access to solar, but maybe they live in an apartment or they just can't afford solar PV for their own home. So a community-based solar project is one in which sort of many individuals within the community can sort of benefit and participate in a solar installation. But building that is not easy, so it often requires some strong technical assistance to help navigate sort of like state and regional policies, have access to financing, and tackle other challenges. And so our researchers participate in technical assistance to help the implementation of community-based solar projects. And then as a third example, I'm sure you're very much aware of extreme heat-related illness and death. Unfortunately, low-income communities often live in older buildings that don't have insulation or active cooling. And so low-income communities, especially the elderly populations within those communities, are very vulnerable to heat-related illness. And so researchers across ETA, so not just in my division, but Qianzhen Hong and Ronan Levinson and Max Wei, have been engaging in sort of research sponsored by various entities over a number of years to help develop sort of a toolkit of best practices for extreme heat mitigation and extreme heat resilience for low-income communities.
A lot of passion there. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite examples you want to share? Or
Yeah, that was a great list from Tom. And I'll mention a couple more. We actually do research on how wind farms change the value of homes that are near wind farms. And there actually have been some research that shows there was concern that people's home values would go down, but some recent research actually showed they went up if they were near a wind farm. So when you're deploying some of these things in the community, people are concerned about wind and solar. So that one involves extensive. There's a lot of work up in New England for offshore wind and community engagement around that. One of my favorites is the Oakland Eco Block, which is an urban microgrid. It's extremely difficult to do it, but the concept is that the homes would be on their own islandable microgrid. So if the power was out, they would have electricity. and they have photovoltaics and energy efficiency. So you do the energy efficiency before you put in that new heat pump, and you then put solar on the buildings, and they had shared EVs. But it's been very difficult, a regulatory model, because the working with the local utility has been problematic. So there's a lot of regulatory issues. And so when we do this research, we have to understand the local markets and policy issues. And I think the example around extreme heat is really good, because we've been working on this concept, what's called passive survivability. So how comfortable is the building when the power's out? And having better windows actually helps the building perform, whether it's heat or cold, extreme heat events or extreme cold events. We want the building to be livable for as long as possible if there is power outage. And climate change, the most common health impact from climate change is heat vulnerability. So that the concepts that Tom mentioned are very important. So a broad range of things, and it's really a new way of thinking that our researchers are thinking about the local impacts of the
Now
technology.
you're creating a compilation of sort of examples, are you not?
We are on our web pages. Yeah,
So people can go look there for more.
they can.
You have some wonderful examples as well. I think that goes to our lab page. I was going to share that at the end, but.
Oh, well, thank you, Carol. Yeah, we are in the process of launching a community alliance around direct air capture. This is in the southern San Joaquin Valley. And the goal is to couple production of bioenergy, which you can peel off some of the carbon dioxide from that, and then sequester it geologically below ground so that this becomes, typically biofuels are sort of carbon neutral, but you can actually make this system carbon negative. The challenge from a community relations standpoint is people are unfamiliar with geological carbon sequestration. It's sort of like taking the fossil fuel energy production and running it in reverse, right? Rather than extracting carbon from the ground, you're putting it back. But there's concerns about whether or not this will impact the water table and impact the potability of wells in the area. A lot of people use wells. There's concern, very valid concern, around induced seismicity. People may or may not be familiar with the effects of CO2 on people, so they're worried about what happens if there's a CO2 line blowout. You know, what impact would that have? And so in order to make sure that this project was viable from the get-go, the whole project was conceived around a community co-ownership model that's very much baked into the way the project is designed. There are community engagement metrics. The community was engaged early on in terms of setting standards around transparency and accountability, so that they're the ones who set the standards. We didn't. Again, that's a really important element for trust, because they're the ones who are telling us what they need in order to feel like we're being good neighbors, which I think, again, is this sort of turning the tables aspect on this that really makes the community feel like they're partners in this effort, and that they welcome being, on the frontier of a very important energy solution. The second one that just got a notice from Mike Worthel today is a project around extraction of lithium from the Salton Sea. It just got an award from Mike, which is very nice. And the goal there is to provide the lithium that we need for electric car batteries. We need 7 times the production rate year on year that we currently have. And that's an extremely steep climb. A local expert in my division said that lithium is more in demand than any other element in the periodic table right now. I mean, the demand for it outstrips supply more than any other element in the periodic table, which is kind of remarkable. And so one of the efforts is going to be to extract it from the Salton Sea, but this, that extraction comes along with production of titanic amounts of brine and a bunch of other byproducts. And then the question becomes, how do you produce, what do you do with the byproducts of extraction of lithium, which we know is a social good in a way, but a greater good in a way that doesn't impact the local community. So the greater good can't be at the, at the cost of the local community. And that's, that's another one of these tricky juggling acts, which has to be managed as we go to scale. But that's another example for my area.
Lots of good examples here. So you have now convinced people in the audience, in the virtual audience, that this is a good thing to do. What that's going to do is that's going to create an appetite in our researchers to say, okay, what do I need to do? Where do I get started? So how can our researchers be better positioned and equipped for community engaged research? Are there resources we should point them at? Are there any do's and don'ts? We had a very interesting conversation earlier about what not to do. So let me start with Marianne on this one.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I think the first one, the really simple high level one is don't assume you think you know what the community wants, because we may do our research, we may do some reading, but the community is not a singular voice. And actually getting the people even to come to the table is not easy. Getting, whether it's pizza or donuts or a school night, or, what is it going to take to actually get them to share? And are there voices that need to be at the table? So getting the people, and then listening. That's what we hear over and over, is that, we want to tell them, but we also have to give them space and time to listen. And there are a number of guides and best practices materials that are
Okay.
being developed for this kind of community engagement.
Terrific. Your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, I think this aspect of listening is really important. I look at this issue through sort of an incentive lens structure. Like, okay, we're motivated to do research. What is it, what would it take for the community to feel incentivized about having somebody effectively treat them as, well, not exactly as guinea pigs, but, as partners in running an experiment? So what is the incentive for them? I think being very intentional about that, being very thoughtful, and again, to your point, Marianne, not presuming that our eagerness to do research outweighs their very bread and butter needs to make sure that their families are safe, that their kids are getting a decent education, and that whatever we're doing along with them is somehow beneficial, again, in the here and now. What I have found, Tom, you mentioned this earlier, we're trained as scientists, not as our bedside manner typically is not one of our more redeeming qualities. So finding experts at the lab who really know community relations, who are subject matter experts in community relations, who have walked the walk, who've built those relationships, I think is a great way of sort of cutting to the chase. And we have benefited so much from hiring someone into our area who has an incredibly deep Rolodex, and also, to your point earlier, Carol, knows what a face plant in this arena looks like. That's so yeah. I think finding someone you can talk to and bounce ideas off internally. Going to a community with a hot mic, having not worked it internally a lot before you go, I think is probably another way of getting off to a wrong start. So making sure that you've workshopped it intensively internally, and that it's not in laugh out loud territory would probably also be really great advice.
Awesome.
Not to chew clock, but I want to go back to the previous question because I'm looking, and then I'll answer the question.
That's okay. We have time. Go ahead.
I was just enjoying the pictures, and I love actual old, tangible, touchable pictures. I like the LED displays too, but so I'm looking at Ashok Gadgil up here, and I'm a little bit embarrassed that I didn't use one of his projects as an example because, what are the do's and don'ts? And how can we be better prepared to do community engaged research? I think generally speaking, we should come up with a list of best practices, frankly, do's and don'ts. And we could probably follow and map out some do's and don'ts based upon Ashok's career. So he's holding the Berkeley Darfur stove there, and he was inspired to do that to solve some real challenges that particularly women, but families in Darfur were having at a time of incredible crisis. And I remember how often he took trips to Darfur to work with communities to make sure that what they were developing was going to be an actual replacement or cooking technology. So it would be used as opposed to become sort of a bookshelf. But beyond that, I remember, and this is true of a lot of his research, he built the lasting model because he enabled local businesses to actually fabricate and distribute and
That's-
sell
yeah,
those. And he did the same
sustainability.
thing with the UV waterworks as well
Mhm.
before that. So hopefully that was meaningful to y'all. I got a nod. Thank you.
Mhm.
So some of the more do's and don'ts. I think that community engaged research can take on lots of shapes and forms. Frankly, it's not necessarily easy to do. Again, just coming back to the fact that we're not necessarily trained to do it. But there are just some hurdles to achieve, like the way that we get research funding and the way that we shape research projects. It doesn't always lend itself to sort of best practices in community engaged research. So for example, one best practice in community engaged research that might be hard to implement is to make sure that community members have decision-making power throughout the project. As we as researchers with a scope that's sort of drafted and organized, say funded by DOE, that's kind of a new concept, I think. So, anticipate challenges. I think that as we've discussed, you have to be culturally sensitive. You have to understand the problems as spoken by the community members. You can't go into the communities thinking that you understand their problems and you're just going to dictate a scope of work and make it transactional. So you have to invest the time up front beyond sort of the research opportunity. So maybe that's the lesson. Like, if you're interested in community engaged research, don't wait for the lab call or the FOA to come out, because it's kind of too late to begin engaging with the community. Then after all, the lab calls and FOAs come out with a month before proposals are due, right? That's not enough time to build a trusting relationship. So we have to
That's
work
good practical
on building
advice.
that trusting relationship with the community, and that takes time.
That's really good practical advice. And I just want to add that I think we have some wonderful resources in the lab to help us build those kinds of relationships, and they're kind of sitting here. Jen's organization is fabulous in engaging with communities. Lady spent time in DC and kind of understands DOE's perspective on these things and is a wonderful resource. And of course, our Learning and Culture Office really helps guide us in our thinking and how this is part of our stewardship value. So I think we have some really great resources to do that kind of workshopping that you talked about. At this point in time, I think we want to transition maybe to some audience questions. So if you're online and you want to put a question in the chat, that will be relayed to us. If you're in the room, just let us know and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay, we have a question up there. Let's go.
In absence of ETA researchers in the room, I'm going to ask some questions that I've heard come up before. One of which is, how do I find community partners?
That's a really good question. And so we shake the trees. We start with who we might know in a region, and we actually have a database that we maintain about industry partners, but community-based partners. Obviously, if we're working in Alaska or Maine or Arizona, we have a lot in California, but to find regional partners may mean finding a university nearby, industry partners that we know that have geographic diversity. So it's a good question, and it takes time.
Any insights, gentlemen?
Yeah, a lot of our research is pretty geographically connected because for example, we need a specific kind of rock formation underground. So in our case, we'd be looking for, I think CalDAC began with an outreach to some specific non-governmental organizations in the Southern San Juan Key Valley who dealt with environmental justice and environmental health, and then used them, or not use them, but engaged with them to figure out, a broader network to begin talking to. But it was very much geographically connected, and then doing effectively a cold call to an organization and saying, we think this could be a benefit to the community, but could you help us understand what the lay of the land is here? So that again, they felt like they were being engaged as a partner. But that, yeah, sometimes it will start with a cold call, but to someone who does environmental justice. And I think increasingly, my impression is that increasingly you'll find communities many communities have such NGOs because of the impact, for example, of industrial agriculture in the Central Valley. So I don't think in California, at least, you'd go very far without bumping into one.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, maybe you already mentioned Jim Hawley, but Jim Hawley is very actively engaged in bringing the research to communities throughout California. So I think Jim is a tremendous resource for that. And then, we've had a lot of research over the past, say, decade and longer, frankly, that has involved community engagement. The California Energy Commission, a lot of our research for the California Energy Commission has community partnerships built in. And so frankly, what we should do if we haven't already is sort of make that database more publicly available to the lab community so that, it can be a resource and sort of ease the burden, ease the initial steps for researchers.
I think I would add is we try to be embedded in the community on a regular and ongoing basis. We don't want to be introducing ourselves for the first time in those kind of circumstances. We want to be seen as members of the community and engaged. So everybody can help by being part of our community outreach activities, whether we're interacting. We host local, state, and regional legislators. And city government officials. We host educational organizations. We are out in the communities and community events like Solano Stroll and so we're trying to get in and have the lab face be seen out there. But we also, and that helps us build networks, as does, say, our community advisory group. They're a great trusted set of partners who help us identify how we reach out to various stakeholders. But it's going to be a little different depending on what your definition of community is for the work you're doing, which is why it's going to take a lot of dialogue in the laboratory to help develop some of that.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions from our online audience, and here's one for the panel. They're interested in hearing your thoughts on how to deal with issues that might arise when research goals might conflict with community interest. And as an example, maybe there's a CO2 pipeline that goes through a community that's necessary for CCUS, but those community members might not be thrilled to have that there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd start by saying that sometimes projects don't move forward and they pivot and they'll go somewhere else. So that's okay. Sometimes it's an ongoing discussion. The Eco Block site in Oakland was not the first site that the people were working with because some of the neighbors ended up just really, not supporting the thing. The utility wind and solar projects that I've been looking at, the report, some communities just managed to block some of these technologies. So, technologies don't always go right. And that's part of the research we do is why, what happened. And so when we go to the second EcoBlock site, we have a different engagement process and we learn from what we do. So, just like research doesn't always result in things that work the first time, we want to be nimble and agile and continue to understand how to overcome barriers.
Yeah, I think, Jen, I come back to the idea of turning the table. So imagine that this issue was being posed in your own backyard. How would you feel about it? I think that's a very useful lens for understanding how to bring the right value proposition to the table in terms of hearing people out and understanding how they define harm. And to Marianne's point, I mean, we've seen some rather spectacular local examples recently of a failure to communicate that resulted in experiments being shut down. The one that I'm quite familiar with is the effort around solar radiation management that was occurring in Alameda on a ship. This is a crew from the University of Washington. And what they had done was they had concentrated the sea salt from seawater and were blowing out as an aerosol over the ship deck. And the community just got increasingly concerned about this. And ultimately, I got a call from the vice mayor asking me, what's the environmental impact of this kind of concentrated sea salt? And I said, well, if you get on I I think it was clear at this point they were beyond saving. I made the point that anyone who consumes sort of rock salt is getting that from a salt mine, probably in Southeast Asia, where people are being exposed to levels of salt that are way above what was happening on that ship to Alameda. So if you're willing to consume, fine artisanal salt, then you've already bought into the human proposition that people are being exposed to really high levels of salt. And so why are you personally concerned about it? That was probably not the right thing to say to the mayor. Anyway, it went down in flames. And that was an example of the University of Washington, unfortunately, not engaging with the community enough to make sure that they had a very high comfort level about this experiment being conducted in their backyard. Because they were very concerned about aerosol inhalation and didn't understand that sea salt, if you go on a surfboard, and then you're good to, this is the same deal, but that again, that message didn't fly. So that's an example of not communicating correctly and having stuff
It could have gone better. It could have gone better.
gone way better.
I guess I would say it sounds like, as anything else, we're conducting research. Part of what we learn in research is how to conduct the research. And so you have to start out very respectfully. And sometimes you'll find that, well, what I thought I was going to do is not going to work out the way I thought, or else you need to bring people much more into the discussion about, well, I was very struck by some of the conversations down in Lithium Valley about, well, don't you want good jobs? Wait a minute, we're worried about health impacts, right? If you don't ask, you don't know. So I think that's a very salient example. Anything you want to add, Tom? Good. Okay. One more. All right. We have a question in the room.
We have more questions on the chat as well, but
Okay.
I'll ask my quick question. So thank you all for sharing your insights. This has been a wonderful conversation. Would love to ask in terms of, thinking back about the PIs and what they can sort of do. And you, Marianne, you mentioned this a little bit about, having a plan. What are some questions? We don't have like a formal prescriptive plan, like, checklist type thing. And we are thinking about resources so that we can help our PIs. But what are some questions that, researchers can ask as they're sort of like thinking about an engagement plan? And what are some things that they should consider?
You want to start with that one?
Sure, I can kick it off. I think the first question to ask is what the motivation is for the PI to be doing it, just to make sure that they're sort of aligned right from the beginning, that they understand that they may see a scientifically valid sort of problem to address, but making sure that they realize from the get-go that there has to be a partnership with the community so that it's not just bringing science to the community, but bringing sort of societal value to the community as well. So I think maybe just from the get-go, that's one of the first questions to ask is what is my real motivation to do this?
I think a second good question would be, what is the community getting out of it? Right? Just a very simple question. What are they getting out of it?
Yeah, I like what Bill said earlier about the community co-designing the engagement. So if you're working with a community-based organization, you have to actually have somebody local to help you even scope the engagement. So finding those initial partners to get the discussions rolling are very important. And then conducting, community involvement and accessible communication, because some of the community members, how are they even going to know about the engagement? So it's a ongoing process of discovery.
I would say I kind of like the answer that the very first thing you ask about is, what outcomes do we collectively seek? To start and say, presumably I am trying to understand the potential for realization of something or to understand something. And so convincing yourself first that that's, in order to do that, engaging with communities is absolutely the right thing to do. And then asking the question of, and what will those communities learn? How will they benefit? So you can have a dialogue up front about the objectives before you get to the design of the research is probably a useful construct.
All right, so I'm going to ask a question that's popped up a couple times in our chat, which is that, some of the researchers at the lab have tried to engage with community-based organizations and have learned that building trust can be challenging at times. And especially under the current political context, a lot of CBOs are already feeling pretty overwhelmed by the large amounts of organizations who are reaching out to them. So do you have any experience in building trust and sort of convincing or persuading these CBOs that Berkeley Lab is a trusted resource and, we have the capabilities to work with them to make, the community better?
I have a quick comment. In one of the projects that I put together on the CalFlex Hub, we wanted a committee, an equity committee, to understand the equity associated with the technologies we were studying for load flexibility and electric consumption. And we realized we needed to pay the community-based organizations to be on an advisory board. We couldn't just expect them to show up for free and keep giving us free advice. So actually funding their engagement is important. And that took a while to contract with them. So actually a scope of work, here's what we want you to do. So being very purposeful.
Yeah, we've been told that, quote, we don't work for coffee and donuts. I mean, and I think that's totally fair, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just echo, and I wanted to mention that earlier. So thank you, Marianne, for mentioning that. If you really have a partnership, a research partnership, like if I wanted to collaborate with somebody at the University of X on a research project, they're going to be in the budget. So if you're going to partner with a community-based organization, consider them being in the budget, right? And then also consider monetary incentives, some form of compensation for the community members if there are community members actually engaged in the research. And then the first thing I thought of when you asked the question was just one of the examples from our community air quality monitoring was, in one case, we delivered the sensors to the community members and then trained the community members on how to actually operate it themselves. And I think that sort of that trust is built through hands-on participation. I know that's not always possible in all of our types of research that's community engaged, but if it's possible, I think that's the best practice.
One more question.
All right, we're going to take
two
one more
One more
question.
question, two more questions here.
Over
and then
here.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Real quick follow-up question since you brought up funding. Can you provide some examples of the community engaged research projects you talked about? How are they funded and how big are they in terms of the teams that are involved?
Yeah, so I speak to the one that I've been directly engaged with as a PI or co-PI at times, and that's the Community Air Monitoring Program. So my first engagement was funded by the Environmental Defense Fund, and actually funding came through UC Berkeley. And kudos to the Environmental Defense Fund for having the patience for us to develop an air pollution monitoring technology that took us 2 years. One of our graduate students kept saying 2 weeks. It was always 2 weeks away, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I was losing sleep. But, and actually that funding agency, so the Environmental Defense Fund actually wasn't just a sponsor, but they were a partner. So they actually devoted staff members to work in the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project's office just to make sure that that synergy was there, that we were working on a daily basis to understand what the community expected and wanted throughout the research. And then the state of California provides a lot of funding for community air monitoring. In terms of partnerships with the teams, this kind of gets back to how you define the community, but in a different way. So the partnerships, I mean, the teams can be quite large because it takes one or more research institutions involving 2 to 3 people at each research institution, a community-based organization that's deeply embedded within the community and their staff, ideally funded, potentially community members who are engaging in the research, but then also, if possible, like a local agency with some authority, like the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, they're a partner as well. After all, you want to have an impact, which often involves sort of decision making and policy making. So having a policy relevant organization in the sphere of the project, I think, is also really important.
I'd say there's a couple things. One, we need to find common cause with these organizations. It won't mean that always that we have to be providing the funding for others' engagement, because we are working towards common goals. Community partners, we may be able to help point them at resources for receiving funding by ways that we wouldn't even be able to access ourselves. So there's ways that, and I think increasingly we're going to find that there's going to be an understanding and almost an expectation that we'll be building this into our project goals and a lot of our work, at least from the department, from some other sponsors, because they recognize that if the benefits of the research are to be realized, it can't be something where you do the research, write a paper, put it on the shelf and say, okay, I'm done now. It really has to be informed by the community perspectives and goals. It has to be realizable. There has to be follow-on actions that, as I love the way that Tom says, outlive the project, ways of engaging. And so I think we might find that is almost an expectation in the projects we're going to design in the future. Well, I think we're a minute over time, so I just want to thank you all for attending, and thanks everybody on Zoom. Let me just say, the web page, we're featuring a new community engaged science web page on the lab web page, so please take a look at that. Stand by for future events. I think we're going to have a next session in December, is what I've been advised. And in the meantime, if you have ideas for who you'd like to hear from inside the laboratory or even judiciously outside the laboratory, please let us know. And with that, thank you for our panelists.
Thank you.